Hey, it's Soul with another video. This one is gonna kind of sort of take a look back at what I have been calling the preseason of WoW Dragonflight. I guess I could call it the preseason because technically the season just started, so that's a good inference. But I'd like to talk briefly on how this preseason period is really different in a good way from some of the more recent expansions, but also further back. So I'm going to be coming at this from a pretty personal, it's a very anecdotal perspective. All of us, of course, have different goals, different mindsets and play styles and more. I'm not trying to convince you that this is how it is, but that, this is definitely one way to look at how the Dragonflight launch went. This is obviously going to be second screen content, so at least hit the like button, subscribe for more, browse to the other browser tab thing, and game on. I'd like to think that Dragonflight's launch content is probably the best that the WoW team has ever done so far. A big piece of that success, I think, comes from the sheer volume of content, as in, the quest and the side quest content. I'm sure that by now that at least a handful of you have noticed just how many side stories or side quests have been included, way more than what Shadowlands pushed out, even over its full expansion cycle, I think. Time, of course, is going to tell if what we're experiencing right now is only just front-loaded, and then later we're going to be left starving afterwards. But we've seen in the past how we dealt with this time-gated feed of quest content. I'm talking mostly about Renown and those chapters. I think of the often said critique of how WoW expansions that, after a month, the player is, they're bored and there's nothing else that they care to do. I'm trying to specify their critique as opposed to, the "lol, where's the content, Blizz" sort of comment. But even for that very touristy player who just wants to check things out for a few weeks and then quits, a non-time gated schedule like what Dragonflight has can deliver a more full story experience over a shorter period and still leave us pretty satisfied with what we got so far. Now, it's hardly the deep and rich story experience that games like Final Fantasy XIV offer, but I don't think Dragonflight is trying to be more like Final Fantasy XIV, it's just trying to be a better World of Warcraft. By comparison, previous expansions gave us players a kind of taste of what's to come, along with the beginnings of the systems that will build up over time, according to this carefully set schedule by the WoW team. And that definitely has not gone away. I'm thinking of things like the Raid Finder schedule, or Cross-Realm Mythic, the Inspiration Catalyst that's coming later, and when the Valor and Conquest caps, the point caps are finally lifted. But I'm talking about, by systems, I'm talking about the Soul Ash farming, or waiting for the Order Hall thing to unlock that second legendary, or the last Azerite trait ring whenever you get to that level break point, I guess. Those expansions, in the first few weeks, they teased us with what could be if we participate in the grind. Now, sure, down the line there were catch-up mechanisms and there were things to protect the so-called casuals from the so-called hardcore people. And that's where the WoW team created struggles for itself when trying to deliver a satisfying experience for players early on. They couldn't just give people double legendaries off of a vendor or full soul binds or any of that stuff. People were just introduced into this new system, and then they had to race while being held back, while being throttled. And that's where the ongoing critique is rooted. That's where the ongoing critique is kind of rooted, where WoW expansions lately had this feeling of needing to grind for things before we could feel like we could really start playing the game. The grind, of course, was paced as well, and that easily got frustrating for some. But that wasn't entirely the case way back in the day, vanilla, TBC, and during the Wrath periods. We effectively got a few new abilities as we leveled, and we got, another talent row or so, and beyond getting gear to support these talent builds through reputation or crafting, that was pretty much it. I'm not saying that that's why talent trees came back. That was explained in all sorts of ways across a number of interviews. But the return of talent trees, it freed the WoW team from that struggle of just kind of teasing players with those sorts of, abilities, game systems and whatnot. Like new characters here in Dragonflight, they grow into their talents, and players get to mess with them as they, level, or they rely on like whatever the talent template or whatever that is. And by the time they hit max level, then they can just place those last few points and start setting up talent loadouts. And, they're nerding out over the shuffling of these abilities and talents, these pieces now, whereas in expansions past, we had to wait till what? 7.3.5 and 8.3 and 9.2 before our classes could really feel complete. Especially in vanilla WoW, but during those early expansions, the journey, leveling, it was a part of the game experience. Leveling was slower, it was a bit more dangerous, and as a whole, the world itself felt like a character in the game. It's a notion that's not gone totally, but in my opinion, it felt a bit compromised during the Legion through Shadowlands era. The race to endgame, that's a thing, regardless of the WoW expansion or the WoW Classic expansion that we're talking about. In fact, WoW Classic, it highlighted the weakness of some of these older expansions. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm aware that using the later version of class balance on the start of a Classic expansion, that totally throws things off, but speaking broadly, with only one raid challenge of endgame raid stuff, there isn't a whole lot to that challenge. Like, you do it for complete tier sets or gear sets, you do it maybe differently, faster, with less gear, fewer people, but nothing else that's really curated before the player from the game. The WoW Classic tail, it's just pretty short. Dragonflight is trying to do something different. Like, from our first steps onto the Dragon Isles, we're subtly working towards one of two kinds of endgame. I'll just kind of keep it simple. Like, one type of endgame is made up of world content with reputation and renown and all the activities and the bouncing around and the crap to farm and professions to level and garbage to pick up. That's the kind of endgame where those players, they kind of sort of live in the world of Dragonflight. They're a part of it. And with a few exceptions, those characters and their alts can immediately start living in the world of the Dragon Isles right away. Outside of our preferences, there's just much less pressure to level. And we've seen that from comments and social media. Like, my alts can pick up gathering professions and fully fly around right away. I can go, if I wanted to, I can go on full on with roleplay. Like, I can have an alt that does nothing but grand hunts. They're mogged with all the tribal looking centaur transmog. They got their hunting puppy and they're just living their best life. And if that's what they want to do, cool. And then the other kind of endgame is, what many of us are familiar with Big 3 content. The raiding, the Mythic Plus, the rated PvP. What did players do who were hyper-focused on that during the preseason? Now, obviously, it was like pretty much everything and anything that they could do for gear and consumables, and, that's totally fine, but in practice, if I made a fresh alt and leveled it now, right? If I did all that now, what other hoops am I going to need to jump through to get into Big 3 content? Outside of just item level and overcoming those social barriers? Nothing really. I just plug in my talents and I'm good to go. Then I'm ready to farm up some gear. There's a certain coolness what the WoW team did here with Dragonflight. They're creating they're creating one kind of expansion endgame experience that's built into leveling, and another experience that endgame players can jump into straight away as soon as they're done leveling. Now, there's obvious overlap, but there's also, I guess it's also much easier to slide from one game type to another. Overall, I'm just trying to say that Dragonflight's preseason stuff, it's turned out to be very, very good. It's a really good start to this expansion, and I can't wait to see if this video ends up aging like milk. So leave a comment, like and subscribe, stay safe, stay healthy, and stay breezy.